Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories. Don't open. I checked into the hotel just before nightfall, the long drive leaving me exhausted, my body aching for sleep. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something else, something stale, like old carpet soaked in memories better left forgotten. The walls were the color of nicotine-stained teeth, and the dim lamp by the bed flickered every few minutes, as if unsure whether it wanted to live or die. Cheap hotels always had a way of making you feel like you were borrowing someone else's past. I locked the door, twisting the deadbolt twice for good measure. Habit. Safety. I had stayed in worse places before, but something about this one scratched at the edges of my nerves, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Maybe it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on me. As I set my bag down by the nightstand, I noticed the folded piece of paper lying on the floor just inside the doorway. It hadn't been there when I walked in. My pulse ticked faster as I bent down, hesitated, then picked it up. No name, no hotel letterhead, just a short, scrawled message in jittery handwriting. Whatever happens, don't open the door after midnight. I exhaled sharply through my nose, more annoyed than afraid. Some kind of prank, probably. A shitty joke from a bored hotel employee or a previous guest with a twisted sense of humor. But the words gnawed at me, the ink smudged in places as if written with a trembling hand. I checked my phone, 11:23 p.m. Not that it mattered. I wasn't the type to scare easily, and I wasn't about to let some cryptic note dictate my night. Tossing the paper onto the nightstand, I kicked off my shoes, slid under the stiff, overbleached sheets, and closed my eyes. Sleep came in waves, light, uneasy, the kind where the world never quite fades away. The distant hum of the vending machine in the hallway. The occasional creak of the ceiling, as if the building itself were shifting, breathing. Then, just as I started to sink into something deeper, something colder, I heard it. A knock. Not just a knock, a pounding. Slow. Deliberate. Boom. 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 I sat up so fast my heart nearly lodged itself in my throat. The room was pitch black, the lamp having finally given up. My phone screen glowed weakly on the nightstand. 12:07 a.m. The knocking continued. Louder now. Boom. 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 Then, a voice. Sweetheart, open up. It's me. My stomach flipped. The voice was soft, familiar in a way that made my blood turn to ice. My mother's voice. But that was impossible. She was in another city, hundreds of miles away. I had just spoken to her before checking in. Come on, honey, the voice pleaded. I need to see you. Let me in. I clamped a hand over my mouth, swallowing a whimper. My brain scrambled for logic, an explanation. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe exhaustion had twisted reality into something unrecognizable. But no, this was real. Too real. The door handle jiggled. My breath caught in my throat. The deadbolt held, but something scratched against the wood, slow and deliberate. Nails? Please, the voice wavered, thick with something that sounded like tears. Don't do this to me. A deep, primal instinct screamed at me to stay still, to not open the door. Then, under the crack at the bottom of the door, something moved. A shadow. A shape. And then, a hand. Long, bony. Skin stretched tight over knuckles like sharpened stones. The fingers twitched as they curled against the wood, pressing, testing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then, the voice dropped to something else. Something wrong. A rasp. A growl. Something that wasn't my mother. And it whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." The air turned to ice. The hand slid back into the darkness. The knocking stopped. Silence swallowed the room. I stayed frozen in place, my heart hammering, my skin damp with sweat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A text message. From my mother. Are you okay? I had the strangest dream about you just now. Like something was trying to get in. The room around me seemed to close in, suffocating, thick with something unseen, something waiting. I stared at the door, my pulse a wild, erratic thing in my throat. And then, from the hallway. Boom. 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 The air in the hotel room had turned heavy, pressing against my chest like an unseen weight. My breath was shallow, controlled, as if even the sound of it might draw attention to me. The knocking had stopped. The pleading voice, my mother's voice, had faded into silence. But I didn't move. I didn't dare. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stay still, to blend into the darkness, to pretend I wasn't here at all. The warning on the note ran in a loop through my mind: what happens, do not open the door after midnight. My phone sat uselessly on the nightstand, my hands too numb, too paralyzed to reach for it. My heart was a hammer against my ribs, beating out frantic, uneven rhythms as I strained to hear beyond the door. Then, a slow, deliberate scrape broke the silence. It wasn't knocking. It wasn't a voice. It was something dragging along the wooden floor of the hallway, something impossibly slow, as though savoring every movement. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. The air smelled off, a faint sourness, like something old and damp, something left to rot in a forgotten room. I felt the hair on my arms rise as a soft, deliberate tap-tap-tap followed the scraping, like the tip of a long finger testing the wood just outside my door. The doorframe creaked ever so slightly, as if something was shifting its weight against it. I could see the thin strip of dim yellow light from the hallway stretching across the carpet, unbroken at first, until it wasn't. A shadow, impossibly long, spread across the light, its shape stretching, shifting, contorting into something unnatural. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched, unable to blink, unable to move. The shadow expanded, distorting like ink spilled in water, spilling out farther, wider, as though whatever was on the other side was crawling closer, its limbs dragging against the floor. And then, God help me, the thing outside let out a breath. A slow, rattling exhale, drawn out and unnatural, as if its lungs had forgotten how to work. The air in my room grew even colder, thick with a cloying dampness that made my skin crawl. I could feel it now. Not just hear it. Feel it. A presence so near, so wrong, that my body responded on an instinctual level, my muscles locking up in rigid terror. The moment stretched, seconds becoming lifetimes, until I finally dared to inch backward, my body moving against every command my mind screamed at me. The mattress groaned beneath my weight, and I froze. The air stilled. The scraping stopped. Silence, thick, expectant, waiting. And then, just when I thought the nightmare had passed, the thing outside did something far worse than knocking, or whispering, or dragging itself across the floor. It reached under the door. The first thing I saw was the nails, long, yellowed, uneven. They slid through the gap, scratching lightly against the floorboards, testing, stretching, reaching. The skin was grayish, too thin, pulled tight over bones that jutted at impossible angles. I clamped my hand over my mouth to silence the whimper rising in my throat. The fingers, slow and deliberate, tapped against the wood, like it was thinking, deciding, savoring the moment. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to whatever would listen that it would stop, that it would retreat, that this was all in my head. But the fingers only curled, pressing against the carpet, dragging themselves further inward. The room was suffocating now, thick with something unseen, something vile. My mind raced, grasping for any rational thought, any plan, but there was nothing, only fear, raw and unrelenting. I could barely breathe as the thing's hand, impossibly long and skeletal, spread across the floor, fingers flexing, moving, searching. And then, just when I thought it would stop, it did the worst thing imaginable. It began to crawl forward. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the muted hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of the city outside. My fingers were clenched so tightly around the blanket that my knuckles ached, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. The thing outside my door had stopped whispering. The pleading, the sobbing imitation of my mother's voice had gone silent as though it knew I was no longer fooled. But the air had changed. It felt heavier, as though something vast and unseen was pressing against the walls, bending the very fabric of the space I occupied. My ears strained in the stillness, waiting, dreading the next sound, and then, I heard it. A slow, deliberate scrape. The unmistakable sound of nails dragging against wood. My breath hitched as the noise crept along the bottom of the door, moving from one side to the other, tracing an invisible pattern that sent chills racing down my spine. I felt sick. The kind of sick that coils in the gut and makes the body reject reality. I tried to steady my breathing, to tell myself that this was some kind of prank, a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare that would vanish if I just kept my eyes closed. But then something slid under the door. It was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, unnaturally long, the joints slightly swollen, the fingers too thin, like something that had been stretched beyond its intended proportions. My body locked up as the fingers flexed, tapping lightly against the carpet, testing the texture as though savoring the feel of it. I wanted to move, to scream, to grab something heavy and smash that grotesque thing into dust, but I couldn't. My limbs felt encased in ice, my breath trapped in my chest as I watched in frozen horror. The fingers curled, dragging the rest of the hand through the narrow gap, revealing an elongated wrist and the suggestion of an arm that did not belong to anything human. I sucked in a shaky breath and did the only thing I could think of. I yanked the blanket over my head like a child hiding from the monster in the closet. It was irrational, stupid even, but I wasn't thinking logically anymore. I just knew that if I saw what came next, if I truly looked at it, something irreversible would happen. My mind would crack, my body would fail, and I would never wake up the same again, if I woke up at all. The tapping on the carpet stopped. A deep, wet inhale filled the silence, the kind of breath one takes when savoring the scent of something exquisite. I could feel it now, its presence looming impossibly large in the tiny space of my room, as though it had slithered under the door in ways that I couldn't perceive. My stomach clenched, my pulse a wild, erratic drum against my ribs. The air had changed again, but this time it wasn't just heavy. It was wrong. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The air lightened. The pressure eased. The room settled. I listened, barely daring to breathe, waiting for another sign of movement, another scrape, another whisper, but there was nothing. A full minute passed. Then another. The silence stretched on, so long that my own heartbeat felt deafening in my ears. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and aching. Slowly, cautiously, I lowered the blanket just enough to peek out. The room was exactly as I had left it. The chair was still by the window. The TV remote sat untouched on the bedside table. The only thing out of place was the faint indentation in the carpet where something had rested, just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I didn't move. I just sat there, curled up beneath the covers, staring at the door until the first light of dawn spilled through the window. Only then did I finally gather the courage to crawl out of bed and inch toward the door, my pulse hammering with every step. The hallway outside was empty. No strange marks, no lingering shadows, nothing to suggest that what I had experienced was real. But when I looked down, my stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might vomit. There, just beneath the door, was a single slip of paper. Not like the first note, crisp and neatly folded. This one was smeared, damp around the edges, the ink slightly blurred as though touched by something that shouldn't be able to hold a pen. I bent down slowly, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was only 3 words. You looked, didn't you? My breath hitched, my fingers clenched tighter around the damp paper, and a cold, nauseating dread settled deep in my stomach. I hadn't looked. Not really. Not directly. But something knew I had peeked. That single glance, that fleeting moment of curiosity, had been enough for it to know. And now, it was telling me. A warning? A taunt? A promise? My pulse pounded in my skull as I turned the paper over, half expecting to find more words, a final instruction, or some grotesque signature scrawled in something darker than ink. But it was blank. Just that single, damning sentence. The air in the hallway felt thick, as though something had only just left, the walls still carrying the residue of its presence. I could hear the distant sounds of the city waking up, car engines, muffled conversations, the scrape of a garbage truck rumbling down the street, but they felt unreal, like background noise in a dream I couldn't shake. My body screamed at me to run, to grab my things and get the hell out, but my mind whispered something worse. Where would you go? Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by walls. It had found me here. It would find me anywhere. I forced myself to move, to do something other than stand there trembling like a cornered animal. I went to the bathroom and turned on the sink, splashing cold water over my face, willing my reflection to look normal. But my eyes were wide, bloodshot, the skin under them hollowed by exhaustion. I barely recognized myself. And then, as I reached for a towel, I saw it. The mirror hadn't fogged up, not yet, but the words were already there, scrawled in uneven, jagged letters, as though written by something that had never held a human hand before. You let it in. My stomach lurched, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to tilt sideways. I stumbled backward, hitting the door frame hard enough to bruise. The message wasn't written in steam or condensation, it had been etched into the glass, faint, but unmistakable. My hands shook as I reached out, running my fingers over the letters, feeling the tiny grooves scraped into the surface. This wasn't some hallucination, some sleep-deprived trick of the mind. It was real. I let out a ragged breath and turned away, barely resisting the urge to punch the mirror into splinters. This was beyond logic now, beyond reason. The thing in the dark, the thing that whispered through doors and reached with two long fingers, it had been waiting. And last night, when I peeked, when I acknowledged it, that had been enough. I forced myself to get dressed, grabbing my bag, my keys, my phone, anything that made me feel human, tethered to reality. I needed to get out. Maybe just for a few hours. Maybe for good. I didn't know. But staying here, in this room, where something had already crossed the threshold, that was impossible. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. A sick feeling twisted in my gut, a voice in the back of my mind whispering that the moment I opened this door, something would be waiting. That it had been waiting all along. I swallowed hard and yanked the door open in one swift motion, bracing for, what? A figure standing in the hallway? A shadow stretching toward me? But there was nothing. Just the empty corridor, bathed in the indifferent glow of morning light. I stepped out, exhaling shakily, and pulled the door shut behind me. The lock clicked into place. I turned and walked away without looking back. Because deep down, I knew, if I did, the door wouldn't be closed anymore. I made it to the stairwell, my steps quick, almost frantic, the sound of my sneakers against the concrete like the frantic tapping of fingers on a desk. Each step down felt like an escape, a desperate attempt to put distance between myself and whatever it was. But that wasn't how these things worked, was it? By the time I hit the lobby, my breathing had steadied, but my hands were still clammy. The usual morning crowd moved around me, residents heading to work, a guy in a delivery uniform arguing with the front desk clerk, an old woman walking a tiny dog that yapped at nothing. It all felt too normal, like I had stepped out of one world and into another, one where last night's terror had no place. But I knew better. I pushed through the glass doors, the crisp morning air feeling like a slap. The street was already alive with traffic, the smell of coffee and exhaust mingling in the cool air. I needed to clear my head, to shake the sense that something was still watching. Maybe I could go to a cafe, sit somewhere crowded, safe, figure out my next move. I barely made it 10 steps before my phone buzzed. I fumbled it out of my pocket, my hand still unsteady. Unknown number. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. My gut screamed at me not to answer, but my thumb moved before my brain could catch up. I lifted it to my ear, breath shallow. Silence. A long, static-laced pause. And then, a voice, not a whisper, not distorted, but my own. "Why did you look?" The phone slipped from my fingers, hitting the pavement with a dull clatter. My chest clenched so tight I couldn't breathe, my skin crawling with something cold and wrong. The street moved around me, oblivious, but I was frozen. I forced myself to pick up the phone, my fingers stiff, the screen cracked but still lit. The call had ended. I turned in a slow, jerky motion, scanning the sidewalk, the windows, the alleys. Someone had called me. Someone had spoken with my voice. And then, at the edge of my vision, I saw it. A reflection. Not in a window, not in a puddle, but in the glass door of a closed shop. A figure standing just behind me. Too close. I spun around, nothing. But when I looked back at the glass, the reflection was still there. And this time, it smiled.